Autumn mornings in Boston were always the same. Clear skies, crisp air, the streets bustling with life. And then everything shattered. The explosion ripped through the courthouse steps, a deafening roar that sent shockwaves pulsing through the ground. A column of fire erupted, followed by a violent blast wave that tore through the plaza. Ellie Hayes froze, her breath caught in her throat. Her father's car had been ripped apart by flames. Shards of glass rained down like daggers. Twisted metal screamed under the heat's grip. People screamed, alarms shrieked. Chaos unfolded all at once. But Ellie heard nothing, only the fire swallowing everything. She lunged forward, instinct overriding reason, but a strong arm yanked her back. "You can't go in there, it's too dangerous." A police officer gripped her tightly, his voice lost in the chaos. Ellie fought against him, her wide, frantic eyes locked onto the wreckage, desperate for any sign of life. Her father, Judge Robert Hayes, he had stood against the powerful, presiding over cases that others were too afraid to touch, had stepped into that car less than a minute before. Firefighters charged toward the flames. Officers pushed bystanders away. Paramedics rushed in with stretchers. The air was thick with smoke, the acrid stench of burning fuel clawing at her throat. "My dad?" Her voice broke. A bone-deep chill crept into her veins, a terror so vast it threatened to swallow her whole. And then, movement in the smoke. Ellie held her breath as paramedics emerged, pushing a stretcher out of the wreckage. Her father was alive. Blood streaked his face, his suit charred and torn, but he was breathing. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't feel it. Because in that moment, she knew her world would never be the same again. The hospital room was unbearably silent, the only sound the faint, rhythmic beep, beep of the monitor, fragile and unsteady, like the thread of life barely holding her father to this world. Ellie sat beside the hospital bed, her fingers curled tightly around her father's hand, as if her grip alone could keep him here. His face was pale, wrapped in bandages, his breath shallow, labored, as if the weight of the world pressed down on his chest. "We've done everything we can." The doctor's words echoed in her mind, sharp and merciless. There was one last option, an advanced treatment at a private medical center in California, a place where the best specialists in the country could save him. But the cost, $8 million. A number so unreachable it was almost laughable. She had tried everything, pleading with the banks, reaching out to charities, even calling in favors from people in high places, but each time she was met with hesitation, deflection, veiled excuses. Her father was not just another patient. He had made dangerous enemies, and now no one dared to step in. The door creaked open, a tall silhouette casting a long shadow against the cold tile floor. Ellie looked up. Matthew Calloway, the man who controlled Calloway Holdings, a titan in the financial world, known for his ruthless acquisitions and unshakable composure. Cold, calculating, untouchable. He was not a friend, not a savior, but he had exactly what she needed. "I know about your father's condition." His voice was smooth, unreadable. "I have an offer." A shiver ran down her spine. "Marry me for 1 year," Matthew continued, his piercing gaze never leaving hers, "and I will cover all of his medical expenses." Ellie stared at him, disbelieving. A hollow laugh escaped her lips, raw and bitter. "You're offering to buy me?" she scoffed, but the words didn't come out as strong as she'd hoped. Matthew remained unfazed. "Call it a contract if it makes you feel better," he said simply. "I need a wife for my own reasons. You need money. A mutually beneficial arrangement." Ellie's hands curled into fists, her heart aching with the weight of the impossible choice before her. Every part of her wanted to refuse, to tell him she would never agree to such a deal, but then her gaze drifted to the hospital bed, to her father's worn face, his weakened breaths. $8 million, 1 year. 1 year locked in a cage, bound to a man who felt nothing, for the only person in the world who had ever truly loved her. Was it worth it? Ellie took a slow, steadying breath, as if she could hold up the weight of her crumbling world. Then, She lifted her chin and met Matthew Calloway's cold, assessing stare. "Fine," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Boston had never felt more unfamiliar. Ellie stood in front of the towering skyscraper, its glass and steel exterior reflecting the city's pale morning light. At the very top, beyond where most people could reach, was Matthew Calloway's world, one built on wealth, control, and absolute detachment. The penthouse was exactly as she had imagined, breathtakingly luxurious, yet disturbingly empty. Marble floors stretched endlessly beneath recessed lighting. Modern furniture sat perfectly arranged, untouched, as if they existed solely for display. The entire space felt cold, calculated, just like its owner. There were no personal touches, no framed photos, no signs of life. This wasn't a home. It was a gilded cage. Ellie's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag as she stepped inside, pushing down the creeping sense of unease. Matt stood in the center of the vast living room, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. "Your room is in the East Wing," he said simply, as if they were discussing nothing more than an office arrangement. Ellie inhaled slowly, steeling herself. This was real now. The contract was signed, 1 year, starting today. That night, she sat on the edge of the impossibly large bed in her new room, rereading the contract as if searching for a loophole. The rules were clear. She had to appear by his side at public events. They would not interfere in each other's personal lives. There would be no emotions involved. Her jaw tightened. She refused to be just another asset in his portfolio, another pawn in his meticulously structured world. The next morning, she placed a revised contract on his desk. Matt picked it up, skimming through the pages, his brow arching slightly in amusement. "What's this?" "New terms," she said coolly. "I keep my job, I keep my own bank account, I control my own life." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, without hesitation, he signed. Ellie blinked. "No questions?" Matt set the pen down, studying her with something she couldn't quite decipher. "I like people who know what they want," he said simply. "You don't disappoint me." Days passed, and Ellie tried to navigate this strange, emotionless arrangement, tried to remind herself that none of this was real. But then, she began to notice things. 1 week later, on Monday morning, she found a cup of coffee waiting for her on the kitchen counter. Black, 1 sugar, exactly how she liked it. She frowned. "Who made this?" Matt, flipping through his newspaper, didn't even glance up. "Me." A pause. "How did you know?" He turned a page. "I have eyes." And then, a week later, she noticed her azalea plant, the only personal belongings she had brought from her old apartment, had been moved near the window where the light was better. Ellie hesitated, reaching out to brush her fingers over the delicate petals, a strange warmth spreading in her chest. She turned to Matt, but he only shrugged. "It was dying in that corner." His tone was casual, indifferent. Ellie didn't know how to respond. Little things. Things he didn't have to do. Things that made her start seeing him differently. Ellie never imagined she would stand in the grand ballroom of Boston Symphony Hall, surrounded by the city's elite, her arm linked with Matthew Calloway's. But this was her reality now. The night was a blur of champagne toasts, glittering chandeliers, and polite conversation. Ellie had spent years covering events like this as a journalist, yet tonight she wasn't the observer. She was part of the spectacle. She wore a deep blue gown, flawlessly tailored, chosen not by her, but by one of Matt's assistants. Everything about her appearance was curated, designed to fit into his world. And yet, as she stood beside him, she realized he fit into this world effortlessly. She had known Matthew Calloway as the cold, ruthless businessman, the man who spoke in numbers and contracts. But here, in this golden-lit ballroom, he was someone else entirely. Smooth, charismatic, effortlessly commanding the room. People gravitated toward him. CEOs, politicians, artists, all eager for a moment of his attention. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, charming but distant, offering just enough warmth to keep people engaged, but never enough to let them in. Ellie found herself watching him, really watching him. And for the first time, she wondered, Which version of Matthew Calloway was real? They had almost made it through the night when the photographers swarmed in. "Mr. Calloway, a photo with your lovely wife?" Ellie turned to smile politely, but then, "Just a kiss to prove the marriage is real." Her breath caught. This hadn't been discussed. They had carefully orchestrated their public appearances, but this was new territory. She should have stepped back, laughed it off, deflected. But before she could react, Matt was already moving. He leaned in, his palms settling lightly on her waist, and pressed his lips to her cheek. It was brief, appropriate, nothing scandalous, yet it sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. Ellie stood frozen, the echo of his touch lingering on her skin. She looked up, expecting calculation in his eyes, expecting indifference. But there was something else there, something undecipherable, fleeting, gone before she could grasp it. And for the first time, she couldn't tell if they were still pretending. After that night, something changed. It was in the late-night conversations, ones that should have been short but stretched longer than necessary. It was in the quiet moments when she caught him watching her, not with scrutiny, but with something she couldn't quite name. It was in the way his touch lingered, a hand on her back guiding her through a crowd, a brush of fingers that neither of them pulled away from too quickly. Ellie told herself it was nothing, a trick of the mind, a side effect of their arrangement. But she knew better, because she was falling for the man she once despised, and that terrified her. The call that changed everything, the call from California came. Her father, Judge Robert Hayes, had woken up. The doctors confirmed that his brain activity had returned. His recovery was progressing well. Soon he would be transferred back to a local hospital for outpatient care. Ellie had gotten what she wanted. Her father was alive, safe, no longer in danger. So why did it feel like something inside her had just unraveled? Because she had entered this marriage for one reason. But now, she wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. Because in this gilded cage, somewhere along the way, she had lost her heart. Ellie had believed that things between them had changed. After months of living together, after the lingering touches, the unspoken glances, the late-night conversations that stretched longer than necessary, she had let herself believe that this was real. But when she stepped into the penthouse that night, her world collapsed. There, placed neatly on the table, was a stack of papers. A sinking feeling settled in her stomach as she walked toward them, her fingers trembling as she picked them up. Divorce papers. She flipped through the pages, searching for an explanation. There was none. No note, no warning, just cold, impersonal legal language. They still had 6 months left in their contract, so why now? Anger surged through her, burning away the initial shock. She wasn't a possession for him to discard whenever he pleased. Without hesitation, Ellie grabbed the papers and stormed straight to Matt's office. When she threw the door open, Matt was standing by his desk, his posture as composed as ever, except for the flicker of surprise that crossed his face when he saw her. She slammed the papers down onto his desk. "This is how you end things?" Her voice wavered, caught between fury and something far more painful. Matt didn't speak, but she saw his jaw clench, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "No explanation? No conversation?" Ellie let out a short, bitter laugh. "Or did you think I didn't even deserve that?" Matt met her gaze, and for the first time she saw something raw beneath his usual controlled exterior, as if he was fighting himself. "I thought you'd leave the moment your father recovered." His voice was low, hesitant, like a man who had spent his whole life preparing for rejection. "I just made it easier." Ellie felt like the air had been knocked out of her. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. "You really think I was only here out of obligation?" Matt didn't answer, and his silence told her everything. Ellie exhaled slowly, the fire in her veins fading into something quieter, something sadder. "Matt," her voice broke slightly, but she steadied herself. "I love you." Matt froze. She watched his entire body tense, as if those words had shattered the walls he had spent his whole life building. And then, for the first time in his life, Matthew Calloway lost control. He closed the distance between them in an instant, his hands cupping her face, his stormy blue eyes searching hers desperately. "You love me?" His voice was barely above a whisper, rough, disbelieving, as if he didn't dare to believe it. Ellie nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "Not because of a contract, not because of duty, just because it's you." Matt let out a shaky breath, his fingers tightening against her skin as if anchoring himself to this moment. "I love you too," his voice cracked. "I have for a long time." The contract, the terms, the carefully drawn lines between them, none of it mattered anymore. All that was left was two people, finally unafraid, to love each other. For the first time in months, Matthew Calloway was completely unguarded. His hands were still cupping Ellie's face, his breath uneven, his usually sharp, calculating gaze clouded with something deeper, something vulnerable. And yet, he still hesitated. Ellie saw it, the flicker of doubt, the instinct to protect himself from what he feared most. So she closed the distance between them first. Her lips brushed against his, soft, uncertain. It wasn't a desperate kiss, nor was it a grand declaration. It was a quiet confession, a reassurance. "I'm here. I'm not leaving." And then Matt let go of his last restraint. He pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, his fingers tangling in her hair as if he was afraid she might slip away. The papers, the cold, impersonal divorce papers, were still on the desk beside them, but now they were nothing more than meaningless ink on paper. Because this wasn't a contract anymore. It was real. The next morning, Ellie woke to the unfamiliar sensation of warmth and security. For months, she had lived in this penthouse, but for the first time, it felt like home. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting soft golden hues across the room. And beside her, still asleep, was Matt. The ruthless billionaire, the man who had once viewed relationships as nothing more than strategic alliances, looked so different like this, relaxed, peaceful, human. Ellie couldn't help but smile. She reached out, tracing her fingers lightly along the sharp angles of his jaw. Almost immediately, Matt stirred, his eyes fluttering open, their deep blue still heavy with sleep. "You're staring," he murmured, his voice still hoarse from sleep. Ellie smirked. "Maybe." Matt exhaled, his arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her closer. For once, there was no tension, no hesitation. "Stay." His voice was barely above a whisper, but the weight behind it was undeniable. Ellie swallowed past the sudden lump in her throat. "I'm not going anywhere, Matt." And she meant it. A week later, as they stood together at Logan International Airport, Ellie watched as her father, now healthier than ever, prepared to leave for his outpatient recovery program. Judge Robert Hayes turned to his daughter, taking her hands in his. "Ellie, you don't have to stay in this marriage anymore. I know why you did it, and I love you for it. But if this is no longer what you want..." Ellie smiled, no longer uncertain about her answer. "I'm exactly where I want to be, Dad." Her father studied her for a long moment, then nodded, finally understanding. Then, that's all that matters. That evening, as they stood together on the balcony of their penthouse overlooking the city, Matt slipped something into Ellie's hand. A simple, elegant ring. No extravagant diamonds, no grand gesture. Just a promise. Ellie looked up at him, raising an eyebrow. "Are you proposing to me again, Mr. Calloway?" Matt exhaled, his fingers brushing over her knuckles, his gaze steady but uncharacteristically soft. "Not proposing," he murmured. "This time, I'm just asking. No contracts, no conditions, just us." Ellie tilted her head, pretending to think. Will there be a contract?" Matt leaned in, his lips brushing against hers. "No contracts, no conditions, just us." Ellie grinned, then yes. And as he kissed her, deep and unhurried, she knew this had never been just a deal. It had always been something more.